Thank you for being here, and I'm honored to be on this panel. I feel I'm in wonderful company. My story is I was a nurse just out of school and joined the Army and went to Vietnam when I was 21. I graduated from high school at 17, went to a 3-year program. And actually, I was 21, I turned 22 over there, and I hadn't been a nurse very long, so I certainly didn't know what I would have to deal with. But I found out soon enough, and I got through it. I was there for a year. I got through it okay by different methods, partly just becoming a robot, not thinking about what I was doing or what I was seeing. And another way was through humor. We had our little jokes about crispy critters and different types of injuries that made it a little bit easier to handle rather than to really think about what it was, what we were doing, what we were seeing. And most of the guys, and there were Vietnamese too, lots of Vietnamese that we took care of the civilians. Most of the guys were, I was 21. I felt like I was an old woman. They were 18 and 19. They were just kids. So anyway, I became a robot, and I just performed my duties and didn't think about it a lot, and became really, really, really an adept nurse. I could put in IVs that you can't even touch as a nurse back in the States. I could just whip those things in, and but I survived the experience. I wasn't really in a dangerous area. There was only one time where I felt like my life was threatened, so I don't have that baggage of that fear of losing my life to live with. And I didn't know for over 20 years, basically it was 27 years after coming home before I found out I had post-traumatic stress disorder. I knew I had things that would come up that I had a real hard time dealing with, and I knew that I couldn't watch anything having to do with Vietnam or Veterans Day without, falling apart. But I was a nurse. I didn't shoot anybody. I didn't have to live with that guilt. I didn't have to. All I did was take care of the bad stuff and try to make people better. So I never thought that I could even have that as a diagnosis until I agreed to be in a VA study back in New Hampshire in '98, just for a free trip to the East Coast. And after 4 days of grueling testing and psychoanalysis, I was given this diagnosis that hit me like a sledgehammer. It was like I was in shock. And I realized that I didn't necessarily survive the war. But one positive thing was that it kind of made all of my last 27 years kind of make sense about why I had done the things I had done. And anyway, the counselor there at the VA study suggested that I go back to Portland and go to the VA and start getting help. And my reaction was, there's no way I'm going to do that. I don't want anything to do with any government administration, especially the VA, because all I could remember was those pictures from the Life magazine about these guys that came back and were sitting in their own urine and sitting in filth, and that's what I had. That was my vision of the VA. So I said, well, what else can I do? And she said, read everything you can and talk about it. So that's what I started doing. I started getting books, and I started talking to my family for the first time ever, and I mean, that felt good. And then went to a retreat for veterans on the Oregon coast, put on by a Buddhist monk who was a Vietnam helicopter crew chief, whatever. Anyway, and met up with some other veterans and found out that things weren't as bad as I thought they were, as far as getting help from the VA. And I was at the point in my life, as well as my husband, who is also a Vietnam veteran, and we were both dealing with a lot of stuff, and we weren't really dealing with it. So we finally kind of hit our bottom and made a commitment to each other that we were going to go to the VA and get help. And that's been like 5.5 years ago. And I, in June, was granted my 100% disability, 70% post-traumatic stress, and unemployable. I had to give up my nursing career 2.5 years ago, partly because it had been getting harder and harder and harder to be a nurse, to see sick people, to be around anybody that was anything to do with pain or, but the Iraq War sent me into a downward spiral, and I was not functioning as a nursing supervisor. I mean, it was a joke. I'd just hole up in my office, and everybody would be wondering where Colleen was, and beeping me, and I'd be upset when the beeper went off. Why were they bothering me? But I think there's probably a lot of Vietnam nurse veterans that have post-traumatic stress, but they don't know about it, or they're not dealing with it for the same reason I didn't, because we're the healers. We're not the sick ones, we're the healers. And I know that there's a lot of women serving in Iraq and have served in Iraq, and you may not necessarily have had to do anything to do with shooting or killing, or you may be just driving a truck, but if you've seen the devastation from war, you too have PTSD, and so does your family. Your family that's waited at home for that phone call or the knock on the door. They're going to have the same trauma, and so we all have to be there for each other. It was other veterans that helped me get help, to know where to go to get help from the VA, because it's not like they advertise it. And so I would be more than happy to answer any questions to anyone afterwards about how to get started, or what steps you take to get help, to see somebody. And that's it.